Byron's poem relates the biblical version of King Sennacherib's attempted siege of Jerusalem. It describes the events of one night when most of the Assyrian army died, very mysteriously in their sleep. There are other historical accounts of that conflict in which the Assyrians were actually victorious, and it is fiercely contested by historians as to what exactly did happen. But certainly in this poem, Byron is relating the biblical version of events where God's wrath meant that thousands and thousands of Assyrian soldiers died in their attempt to seize the holy city of Jerusalem. We'll hear the story told through the poem and then obviously analyse it in much more detail afterwards.
The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold, and the sheen on their spears was like the stars on the sea when the blue wave rolls nightly on deep Galilee, like the leaves in the forest when the summer is green. The host with his banners at sunset was seen, like the leaves in the forest when autumn hath blown. The host on the morrow lay withered and strown, for the angel of death spread his wings on the blast and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed, and the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts but once heaved and forever grew still. And there lay the steed, with his nostril all wide, and through it there rolled not a breath of his pride, and the foam of his gasping lay white on the turf, as cold as the spray on the rock-beating surf. And there lay the rider, all distorted and pale, with dew on his brow and rust on his mail. The tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown, and the widows of Ashur are loud in their wail, and the idols are all broke in the temple of Baal, for the might of the Gentile, unsmote by the sword, hath melted like snow in the glance of the Lord.
You probably noticed when listening to this poem, it has a really strong rhythm. It's written in anapests. Now, an anapest is a metric pattern which gives us two unstressed syllables followed by a stressed one. In other words, da-da-dum. And each line has 4 of those anapests. So each line goes da-da-dum, 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 da-da-dum. And Byron has used that to evoke the sound of galloping horses, a driving rhythm through the poem, pounding through the poem, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. It's also written in rhyming couplets, a very strong rhyme scheme. You can't help but hear the rhyme. And again, that adds to the poem's force and energy. The rhyming couplets are very strong. You cannot help but hear them. The Assyrian army is also very strong, but not as strong as God, as we'll see when we explore imagery. First though, just a few remarks about point of view. This is a third-person narrative poem. Basically, as I've already said, Byron is retelling a Bible story. So, in that sense, the perspective you're hearing is very much a religious one. The imagery that Byron uses in this opening stanza presents a formidable enemy. The simile used in the opening line of the stanza suggests a very unequal contest. You've got the wolf bearing down on the fold. Now a fold is an enclosure with sheep in, so that's Jerusalem, and the wolf is the Assyrian army. So it's presented here as an evil predator about to attack innocents. Riches are suggested by its gleaming purple and gold, so this is a force in good shape. The sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea. Hear that hissing sibilance there, the repeated s sound, again adding to this sense of evil and power being evoked here. The fact as well that the spears are likened to stars suggests there are many of them. This is a huge enemy. Imagery from the natural world continues into the second stanza, because now the Assyrian army, the individuals within it, are likened to leaves of the forest. So each soldier in this image represented as a green leaf. Again, like the stars, this gives a sense of just how many soldiers there were. This is a big army, which is why the second two lines of the stanza come as a real shock, because now, suddenly, the soldiers are like the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown. That host on the morrow lay withered and strown. So the host is a reference to the army, and the morrow is the next day, the following morning. So having been assembled in all their glory, ready to fight the night before, the next morning they're withered and strown. In other words, they're defeated suddenly. They are lifeless. They're like brown, dead leaves being blown about in an autumn wind. So how could this formidable enemy be so utterly defeated that soldiers that once resembled green leaves on trees, a forest of them, are now dead, brown, blown around in the winds, metaphorically? How did that happen? Well, this stanza begins with the word for, and that signals an explanation. So it was because the angel of death spread his wings on the blast. In other words, God sent his angel of death in order to defeat the enemy. The angel breathed in the face of the foe as he passed, and the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill. So as the enemy slept, the angel of death breathed into their faces. So this angel of death is God's power. He's intervened to protect the holy people of Jerusalem from this godless threat. The once heaving hearts of the Assyrian enemy are now forever still. In this stanza, Byron focuses on a horse that is lying lifeless, just like the soldiers. Again, imagery is taken from the natural world to present this theme of loss and defeat. The horse that is lying dead in this stanza, the steed, its coldness is suggested through the comparison at the end of the stanza, cold as the spray of the rock-beating surf. So that animal is now as cold as the sea. Of course, that reference to foam also evokes the sea, a stormy sea perhaps. The horse's rider is also obviously dead, distorted and pale. Remember those gleaming swords in the first stanza? Now we have a reference to rust, and the dead rider has dew on his brow, so another reference to the natural world. Perhaps Byron reminding us that whatever our riches and our power in life, this is where we all end up. Byron then emphasises the silence, the stillness of the scene. So the tents are silent, the banners are now alone because there are no men to hold them. There are no men either to lift the lances, and the trumpets are unblown. The angel of death has left nothing, no life. And there was no heroic struggle either. The trumpets were never blown. It just didn't happen. The final stanza takes us away from the defeated Assyrians, the dead people, that silent scene, to the survivors, and Byron refers to the widows who wail for their loss. Back in Ashur, which is the religious capital of ancient Assyria. Now, Baal is the word for a god, the Assyrian god. And in the stanza we learned that the idols representing that god, idols are physical representations of God, models, really. So they're broken in the temple, and we infer from this that God's wrath has extended into Assyria, and he's broken the false idols that these people worship. He's taught them a lesson too, hasn't he? That their might, they're a famously aggressive, militaristic society, the Assyrians, but their might against his power is nothing at all. In fact, he merely has to glance their way and they melt like snow. The poem is inspired by a Bible story, so of course a key theme is religion, and the story of the poem is a reminder of God's almighty power and that we defy his will at our peril. The Assyrian army was a mighty one, but it simply melted away like snow when faced with God's wrath, his angel of death. I think it's worth thinking about all of that imagery taken from the natural world in this poem too. You can draw your own interpretations, but for me, that's a reminder perhaps of the superiority of nature, which continually renews. And when we die, we return to nature, we become part of nature. So we should respect it. We shouldn't consider ourselves to be too important in the scheme of things. Relevant here is that image of the Assyrian soldier in gleaming armour in the poem's opening, and then already covered in dew and rust the following morning, nature consuming him overnight.